Good afternoon. I hope you're all having a fine Monday. Maybe fine Monday is a contradiction in terms. I don't know. For me, anyway, I tend to like Mondays. That probably should be illegal, but I really do. I like and thrive on the structure of the week. So coming out of the unstructured weekend and back into my routines is something I actually take quite a bit of comfort in, as much as I love having the freedom on the weekend to read and not have to worry about my email inbox and that kind of thing. But then also, Mondays tend to be pretty slow for me, so I can go for a walk over lunch or record a video now, I guess. I can read during the afternoon, usually ease into getting things done. I don't work in the evening, so I can go to the gym afterward and not feel rushed or anything at all. They tend to be really nice for me. And then on top of that, just today specifically, it's a beautiful spring Minneapolis day with a high in the low to mid 40s, I think. Maybe this will change as I get older, but highs of like 45, 50 degrees are perfect for me. I absolutely love that. Usually just a thick hoodie like this is perfect during the heat or the highs, not the heat, the highs of the afternoon. And then you need to throw on a coat in the evening or in the morning as you're going out to work or whatever. But um, I like that change personally. And it seems like the last couple of years we've been slungshot out of winter and into summer where it's freezing cold. Um, you have a week of spring and then all of a sudden it's summer temps. But this year, so far anyway, we seem to actually be having a gradual spring. And so I'm soaking it in and really loving it. So um, things are all good on my end, despite it being Monday here. Now, this video, as you can tell, is going to cover two different things. I have this as a weekend endnotes video, and then also as a April TBR. I won't combine things like this going forward, but my schedule this last weekend and then this upcoming weekend has some responsibilities in it that's required me to not be around and has thwarted making videos or even having as much reading time as I would like. So you'll have to bear with me for the next week or so, as things won't be, I would say, as they usually are, but I'm just making videos again, so there is no usual, but they're not gonna be, happening in the way that I hope they will be going forward. And then once we're through this, period, in a week or so, I can get into some kind of video making schedule and develop something that's going to work for me. And this is also an experiment, I'll admit, because this weekend endnotes video that I wanna start doing, which will either be on Mondays or Sundays, I haven't decided exactly today, it just happened to fall on a Monday because but yesterday was busy. This will be sort of like my potpourri video. Everyone does a version of this, right? For some people, it's their Friday reads. For others, they come up with their own playful title. But either way, it's a wrap up of the week. It's looking forward to what you're going to read, and then it's just nattering about things like the weather or your Mondays, things like that. It's that video. And the reason I'm sticking on Monday is that my week is so busy during the middle that the Friday reads I don't feel will quite work for me. The bulk of my reading is done Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So I think tagging it on a Monday is going to make the most sense. And we'll just see how that goes. We'll just see how that goes. Now, in terms of the April TBR, when I used to make videos more regularly, or regularly at all, I didn't usually do TBRs because I never stuck to them. Uh, but I think I want to try doing it again, and we'll see how it goes. I picked, what do I have here? It looks like 6 books. I think that's a good number. I rarely read less than 6 books, and it can get as high as 10 or 12, but that's also fairly rare just because of how busy I am right now. And so I think with this number, I'm picking things that I'll definitely be able to hit with 1 or 2 book elbow room where I can throw things on if I do want to deviate a little bit. And I can already feel my list here trying to be thwarted with that new Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson book. I saw that that was coming out well before it did. I just kind of hemmed and hawed over it, didn't think too much of it. And now that it's here, it's making a splash and everybody's talking about it. So I feel a little left out. So I may have to I may have to include that in this list too. But I'll decide. I picked this list already, and this 6 for sure are the ones I'm going to stick to. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that in the moment. Let's work our way back to this weekend end notes part. I want to cover a lot of things in this, just like anybody would in their Friday reads or their variation of this video. So, for example, I read lots of magazines and periodicals, and I can see right down here by my feet that I have most of the April magazines, and I would have read those this weekend if I wasn't so busy. So I'm just going to hold off on those for now and try to work them in going forward. And then also, I only finished 2 books this weekend, and really since I made my last video, so this will be a little bit truncated. But they're huge books, and I have a lot to say about them, so I think this should still be fun and hopefully interesting. So let's get into the books. Otherwise, I'm just gonna keep nattering, and we're never gonna get there. This is gonna be a 45-minute video, and a little self-control when I'm trying to get back into these is probably a good thing. So the first one that I finished, and again, I talked about both of these already, is Radicals for Capitalism: A Freewheeling History of the Modern American Libertarian Movement by Brian Doherty. This was a reread for me, and I just loved it. It brought back so many memories, actually. I was so deep in the weeds of this stuff in high school and college. I could tell you stories about how into it I was. And so it wasn't just reading this book that was fun for me and bringing things back, but really the footnotes, where there's so much more detail, and it's still very, his footnotes are very conversational. It just brought back a lot of anecdotes and stories and ideas that I hadn't thought about in a long time. And so this was a deeply enjoyable book for me, and it has me wanting to press on in this vein. If you are interested in libertarianism and you're looking at overview books in terms of the movement, as you can get from the title of this book, you can't really do better than this book in particular. Now, if you want an overview of more ideas, I would say something like Tom Palmer's Realizing Freedom is something you want to go to, and that's sort of where I'm tempted to go to next too, although that's already going to be me trying to undermine my TBR again, but that's an internal drama I'll have to deal with, and maybe I just need to wait to go to that, or see if I have time if I start blasting through these books, and towards the end of the month I have more free time than I think I'm going to work in other things. But these 2 books together would be really nice for you, and then you could add on, if you want, the comparatively new The Individualists by John Tomasi and Matt Zwolinski. I always get his last name wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's right, Matt Zwolinski. That would also be great. It's a little more idiosyncratic, and also it's pretty in the weeds and ideas and figures to where you really need to be interested to read it. But those 3 together are terrific. That's also, I guess, something I would say about this book. It is a fun thing to read, even if you're not the biggest libertarian in the world, because you're dealing with eccentric personalities like Ayn Rand and Murray Rothbard, and you're seeing them clash with other personalities like Milton Friedman, right, and things like that. And so there's a human drama in here that I think is just going to appeal to anyone. It's fun to read. But there are sections where you're reading about obscure, even by the standards of libertarianism, okay, obscure libertarian hippies in California with loose doctrines, but still fall under this tent, were influential, got money from foundations and things like that, so have to get included in the movement history. But you may find them a slog, or maybe you'll find them interesting because of those eccentricities. But I think there are parts of this book where people would get bogged down if they weren't already into it, if you see what I'm saying. Um, there's a couple things I want to talk about here. There's a million things I could talk about, but just the 2 that are at the top of my mind. The first thing is that it was a little depressing to read in a way, as much fun as I was having. This book came out in 2007, and so it's contextualized in the Great Recession and the war on terrorism, right? Those sorts of world events. And that's fascinating, but because of where we're at now, you sort of you can't help but think about it in terms of contemporary politics. And given that the freedom movement, if you let me call it that, is in such a weird place right now, and you feel like you want voices from that corner, or at least I do so desperately during this time, it just kind of bummed me out. What does the libertarian movement look like right now? Half of it's almost MAGA adjacent, right? And the libertarian movement shouldn't be pro-fascist, right? um, or anti-vax, things like that. It's really weird. But then also there's a chapter in here called The Twilight of the Libertarian Gods. And so it's talking about how, if we look at his upcoming book, which is the primer version of this called Modern Libertarianism, all those figures on the cover and on the back are dead. So where's today's Friedman, Hayek, Rand, you know, Mises, those kinds of people? Who is that today? And so it really got me down about the modern state of the libertarian movement. But then also another interesting thing I was thinking about, and we'll think about more, and could be tied into that first point, I think, in a way, is just a discord within the philosophy itself, or a tension, maybe is a better word. So on page 4, he has this wonderful sentence that almost perfectly captures what excites me about this philosophy and why I like it so much. He writes, it sells the promise, it meaning libertarianism, sells the promise of a world mankind hasn't yet fully known, one with personal liberty limited only by preventing damage to other people or their property. It's a world that would be freer, richer, and even cleaner. I especially love that first clause, I guess. It sells the promise of a world mankind hasn't yet fully known. And it's a forward-looking philosophy. It's an exciting philosophy, and there's something there that inherently isn't in like conservatism, for example. And so that's the promise of libertarianism. But now let's go forward and look at some libertarian or small L liberal victories. Classical liberal values have shaped and defined modernity in many ways. Our role in life is no longer dictated by the status we were born into. To a large degree, though not entirely, legally protected guilds no longer define what we are able to do for a living. Skin color and gender no longer restrict where we can live or work by the enforced order of men with guns. Churches no longer have power over secular life. The dream of total economic planning is over. The Berlin Wall has fallen, and the liberating wealth of capitalism is sought by millions to whom government policy had previously denied it in Asia and the Third World. So we have the promise of libertarianism and some of its victories, which of course makes you wonder, okay, what would a positive program for liberty look like in 2025, and what would libertarian wins look like in 2025? I think I have answers to that, but it's maybe not immediately obvious, which is a problem to other people. But now we get to the part where I think there's an inherent tension here. So on page, here we go, 62, he writes, the vision of the state's role in libertarianism remains, for the most part, the 19th century classical liberal one of a world linked by cosmopolitan principles of free trade, non-international warfare, or welfare. So you have a forward-looking, liberating philosophy that he thinks and says has some pretty discrete, important wealth, freedom-bringing wins, but while at the same time it's anchored in a 19th century philosophy that nobody thinks of as modern. And so there's a little tension there. How do we want to think about that? That's something that was in the back of my mind the whole time I was reading this book, and it will be going forward. So lots to think about in that book. I do recommend it. And again, if you're really into this stuff and you want more on like ideas, the next obvious place to go would be Tom Palmer's Realizing Freedom. And I think those are great because so often we characterize um, libertarianism, or really any philosophy, in terms of a cranky figure like Ayn Rand. And these books will help you appreciate that there are other cranky figures too. It's not just her. And there's different lines and ways of thinking within this broad philosophy, different attitudes too, right? So, great book. And now the other book that I finished is The Penguin History of the Second World War, Peter Calvacaresi, Guy Wind, and John Pritchard. Now, this was originally published under the title Total War. This is a much cooler cover, obviously. Now this particular edition is a reprint, but this particular copy is a reprint, but the first edition came out in 1972. The second edition came out in, I think, 89, and so here's the hardcover that you'll probably see more commonly of Total War when you're out and about. But the Penguin history of World War II, when they picked up the title as their history of World War II, this came out in 99. Now, from what I haven't read the first edition before, only ever the second edition, but based on the forward, at least our authors, the forward to the second edition, our authors seem to think there's very important differences between these, and they lean on the opening of archives, um, and making that point, and then talk about things that they added based on that, such as the solving of details about the solving of Enigma and the importance there. And there really is a lot on that. And to give you a sense of how much they add, this is like 900 pages. This is, depending on whether or not you include the index, this is 1,300 pages. So they're adding a lot of material between the two. So while I can't say for sure that you should just go to the second edition because I haven't read the first edition to compare it to, I'm just telling you that our authors seem to be saying that maybe that's what you should do. So keep that in mind. Another point is that Guy Wint did die, and so John Pritchard came in to help with this project. And the way the book is written is it's divided into two parts. The first half of the book, a little less than half, I think, actually, is what we consider the war in Europe, and the second half is the war in the Pacific. And Peter Calva-Cressy takes the first part, and then Guy Wint, John Pritchard, they have the second part on the war in the Pacific. And so, in a way, they almost could have published this as 2 volumes, especially given the length. This being 1,300 pages is, I think, the longest single volume overview of the war that I have to conquer to go through all of them. Although looking at my bookcase, A World at Arms is really long too. However, I did look at all of them before I embarked on this project of reading all the single volume histories, and I still think this is, the highest mountain that I have to scale. So it does feel nice to have gone through it. So a point on that length, though, if you're reading a single volume overview of any subject, really, I suppose, but let's just say World War II, because that's what we're dealing with, you're going to have to cut things out. So how do you include more things? Well, you write a longer book. So I think that's kind of what they did here. But it is pretty justified because it does live up to the title Total War. And when they use that term in the book, it's always capital T, capital W, Total War. Although, funnily enough, they don't define total war until page like 729 to 730, I think is what I wrote down. Either way, when they add stuff, because it's a longer book, they do it in sections. So, for example, there's one where they deal with Hitler's rule of Europe. So they have two parts. Pardon me, I should have muted my computer before I started doing this. They have one part on the war in Europe where it's Hitler, conquering Poland, conquering France, Denmark, Norway, so on and so forth. I think they go up into through 41, 42, something like that. And then they have a break in the middle and they talk about Britain at war, Europe under Hitler. And that's a lengthy, lengthy section. And then they come back and they say, okay, this is the second part of the war. Probably it starts in 1943, I think. And this is from there to the liberation of Europe. And they break it up that way. And then in the part on the Pacific, and that was actually my favorite part of the book, was the second half on the war in the Pacific. But they stretch back all the way to 1931 in the Manchuria incident. And so in this total war, they're saying for China and Japan in the Pacific, as we're defining it, total war started really in 1931. And it's hard to define a break. A lot of people do it, for example, in 1937, rather than say 41 or 31. But they're saying you can't really do that. Under our definition, it's a series of events that all fit under total war. And that's why we're going back that far. And I love that period on the early 30s. I thought it was fascinating. But as a result, you get, I won't call it an imbalance, but a different balance than you might expect. So you're reading about the war in Europe, and you say, okay, we had 2 sentences. I think it's 2 sentences, maybe it was 1, on the Falaise pocket in France. A really important battle, right, in encirclement. And it's not even in the index. The Falaise pocket is there, but it's not in the index, and it gets 2 sentences. And then you find yourself hundreds and hundreds of pages later reading about British naval British naval considerations of strategy in the 30s, and they're saying, okay, so if we go to war against Germany and Japan, how are we going to allocate our fleet? Okay, now what's going to happen if it's Germany, Italy, and Japan? How are we going to do this? Can we do this? What about in coordination with France? Or maybe not in coordination with France? Okay, now what if we go to war with Germany and then Japan? What if that's the order of events? Okay, now what if it's the other way around? What if it's Japan and then it's Germany? And you get page after page of that, but 2 sentences on the fille's pocket. So it's a little counterintuitive, I think a lot of people will find. But what I want to stress is, first of all, that's still fascinating, at least I found it. But that's not an imbalance. That's not wrong. That's a choice that they made. And one thing that I really appreciate about this book is whenever they do make a choice, they justify it, sometimes really quite explicitly. So I love that. And I'm going to be going back to this quite a lot. I have so much to say about it. Uh, 2 other points. I think just 2 other points, if you'll forgive me here. On those sections where, say, we're talking about Britain at war or Europe under Hitler, but you could do it with any. Another thing that single volume overviews are going to fall victim to is that you're going to be thinking of other books that do those things better, or maybe that they don't have access to. So, Europe under Hitler. There's a great book called Hitler's Empire, or The Wages of Destruction. Not only are those better and full-length treatments of the problems dealt with in this section, they're also newer, so these guys never had those to rely on. So while that was a very enjoyable section to read, you just can't get that out of your head. But that's not really their fault, obviously. And there's examples of that on the war in the Pacific too. And so that's something I want to say, and I kept thinking about while I was reading it. But then also something that maybe I shouldn't take the time to do this, but I will. Before I got into this book, I was just trying to read about it online. I do that a lot to see what was said about it or what other people are saying about it. And I couldn't find very much. So one thing I found was this Reddit post. Somebody was asking for recommendations or was asking to, if somebody had read this book, and a Redditor responded and said, I've read it, but there are some weird claims in the book. So, for example, early on, Calvacaresi claims that Hitler didn't like mass killing. And he's like, "What's up with that?" And then he goes on. And I remember reading that and thinking, "Okay, that is an odd claim, but it's also a very specific thing to pull out of a 1,300-page book." And then I was online reading more things about it, and I found on the New York Times website on their, I don't know what they call this. I don't know if it's like their Wayback Machine, but they have old pieces that you can go back to. I found a review of this book, and now let me look real quick. I think this is from 72. Yeah, so this review is from 72, and the guy is blurbed on the paperback here. Of course, he's not named blurb, so let me scroll to the top here. This review is by David Schoenbrum, and he makes that same point. He pulls out that exact same quote. And so let me read that quickly. In this review, which I'll link to down below, of course, he writes, Calvacaresi states that Hitler did not enjoy indiscriminate killing. Sorry, indiscriminate, not mass. Indiscriminate killing. How could the author possibly know this, and what difference does it make whether a mass murderer does or does not enjoy his killing? The author adds this thought about Hitler. Nor did he think that war was at all agreeable. More than 50 million people died in the war. Some 6 million Jews were gassed and burned, but Hitler did not enjoy this or find it agreeable. So he's being dismissive of that. Excuse me. So while I was reading this book, I was keeping an eye out for that passage and found it in the first 20 pages. And I want to give that slightly fuller context. Calvacaresi writes, and this is on page 23 in this paperback, the simple view, when wrong, can be the worst because it removes doubt and justifies every means. Hitler did not recoil from slaughter. It was so obviously necessary that it probably never occurred to him to consider whether it was agreeable or disagreeable. Genocide was not a moral issue, but the practical application of physical means to social ends. He did not enjoy indiscriminate killing in the way that many simpler Nazis did, although he savored personal revenge. He reveled over the films of the hangings of the conspirators of July 1944. He enjoyed secondhand descriptions of living and dying in concentration camps, but was a strong anti-vivisectionist and could not stomach a demonstration of slaughter when he saw one with his own eyes. Okay, so you can see it's more complicated than what that part of a sentence is pulled out. He's not even quoting the whole sentence. He's only quoting the first part of it. And within there, you can see that alone, you can see he's really saying something different than that he didn't like indiscriminate killing. He says, let me read it again. Hitler did not recoil from slaughter. It was so obviously necessary that it probably never occurred to him to consider whether it was agreeable or disagree. Oh, here we go. Sorry. He did not enjoy indiscriminate killing in the way that many simpler Nazis did. Although he savored personal revenge, enjoying those films of the hangings of the conspirators from 1944. So I think all he's doing is comparing him to some of the more street-like and brutish SA members, maybe. But he's not just saying there that he didn't like killing in the way he described. So I thought there was a little bit of dirty pool going on. And then the fact that it was picked up, this review of 1972 had that point picked up in a Reddit post in 2025 or 2024. It's a fairly new one. Made me think that maybe we should be pretty careful about the things we're writing. Although it also made me suspicious about this review, because if you look at the quotes that he pulls out, they tend to be, early in the book like that, or in the epilogue of the first part, or in the first few chapters of the second part, or in the epilogue of the second part. They tend to be at those discrete points, so, well, I can't prove anything. I got a little suspicious after reading the review. So if you are looking into this book and you can't find much beyond that Reddit post and maybe this old review online, take it from me. It's excellent reading despite its length. You'll have to just be ready for making the time for it, I guess is what I'm saying. While there are, of course, claims in here that are contestable, how could there not be? It's 1,300 pages. They do a really nice job, and they try to justify everything they're writing. So I really, really recommend Total War. Okay, so that's what I finished this weekend. 2 huge books. And I guess that counts as my March of the Mammoths. I guess I wasn't formally doing March of the Mammoths or anything like that, but that certainly counts. So perhaps I'll add that to the hashtag down below. Of course, reading long works, especially long works of history, especially long works of World War II history, is not anything strange to me. So doing a special event for long books seems a little odd, but given what most people read, it is a good thing that we do that. And it does feel so good to get through one. It's a big win, right? Also, there are things you're going to be able to do in a 1,300-page history of World War II, much of which I've just described, that you can't do in a 500-page history of World War II. There's themes that you're going to be able to grab onto that you can't grab onto, or maybe not as fully, in a more narrow book. There's tons of virtues in it, so it's a good event, and I finally have something to count for it, I guess. So is that technically my first BookTube event since I've been back? Anyway, let's end there for the first part of the video and try as quickly as we can, since this is getting long, to go through my TBR. The first one will help because I won't say too much about it. It's just Modern Libertarianism, a brief history of classical liberalism in the United States. He did an interview, I think, last month with Nick Gillespie, editor at Reason Magazine, and Nick Gillespie is one of the best interviewers out there, I think. I think the name of the show or the podcast is The Reason Interview with Nick Gillespie, but there's usually a video version of it as well on YouTube. I'll link it down below, and you can take a listen. It's a fun thing to listen to, and since I haven't read this yet and have only listened to that, I don't want to say too much, but he confirms in there my suspicion about this, that this is essentially a primer on libertarianism. So if you want a primer on modern libertarianism, basically post-war libertarianism, and you don't think you're interested enough in it to go and read, I don't know how long that was, 600 pages of his longer book, I think this would be a fine thing to go to, and probably a nice overview. But next week, after I finished it, I'll have a little bit more to say about it. And then going on here, the next 2 books are examples of me expanding my reading, trying to become a more well-rounded reader, I guess is what I'm saying, but maybe more adventurous too. I want to find more things interesting, and so if I do formal TBRs, this is a way to plan and force myself into doing that. And then maybe if I tell you guys that I'm doing it, I'll actually do it. It's almost like when you tell people that you're going on a diet. Okay, maybe if I tell everybody that I'm going on a diet, then I'll actually have to do it, because if I don't, I have to go through the embarrassment of saying, oh, I didn't stick to my diet. Maybe that's what this is. Although hopefully I will ultimately find this more enjoyable than going on a diet. So the first one is a novel, and I want to work in more, not just more fiction, because I do read fiction. It's just they're all dead. More contemporary fiction, and so I'm taking a lead on this. I'm getting these from somewhere, but this first one sounded fascinating to me. This is Quarter Life, a novel by Devika Reggie. I'm sorry if I'm getting the inflections wrong on the name there. Um, and she came out with this last year, I think. It's her debut novel. Yeah, so it's her debut novel, and I believe this is a 2024 release. And it caught my eye because, so it was first published in India in 23, but then came out here in 24. It seems like a complex work with a lot of things going on, which inherently interests me, but then also the subject matter does too, because it has a political dimension to it, and I'm literally just that easy. It's called Quarter Life, I think, because that's about the age of the characters involved here, but I don't know for sure. So on the inside flap here, it says Quarter Life is a groundbreaking portrait of a nation on the cusp of a new age. When the Bharat Party comes to power after a divisive election, Naren, a jaded Wall Street consultant, is lured home to Mumbai by their promise of better days. With him is Amanda, a restless New Englander eager to live her ideals through a social impact fellowship in a slum. Soon after, Naren's brother, the charismatic talent scout Rohit, grows infatuated with Amanda. Inspired by her family's story, he sets out to explore his roots in the countryside and falls in with very fiery young men that drive the Hindu nationalist machine. As they each come to grips with new India, their journeys coalesce into a riveting milieu, its debates and desires as fraught as they are compulsive. The result is an ever widening chorus that feeds into a festive night when all of Mumbai is on the streets and the simmering unrest erupts. And that description right there just had me right away. That sounds so good. So I hope it is. This is part of my adventure into contemporary fiction. We'll see. I will definitely follow up on that. Um, and then here, this is me becoming a Civil War guy. I've been doing, at least one. I think I did one in January, two in February, and none in March. So I need to put more Civil War in deliberately. Maybe I should even be doing at least 2 month Civil War books. But for now, I just threw one in. And this is Landscape Turned Red, The Battle of Antietam by Stephen Sears. And I'm told that this is, sort of the book on Antietam to read. So Antietam was I think in 1862, and there was something like 80,000 Union troops to 40,000 Confederate troops. And I was watching a video on this, and I even wrote it down. It's just an overview of it. I love doing that, especially if I'm not familiar with the subject. Watching some YouTube videos on it can be so helpful. And when it's battle history too, I like that because you'll have the visualization of the map, and that just helps a lot when you're reading the book, especially if it doesn't include maps. Although I'm sure this does. Most do. Yeah, there are maps in here. But having that in the back of your mind as you're reading the book is so useful. Whereas if I go into a book about, the landings at D-Day or the Battle of Guadalcanal, like, I can reenact those battles with salt and pepper shakers at the Thanksgiving dinner table, right? I know that stuff really well. So when it's a new subject for me, I find that incredibly useful. But in this video, the guy talking says, I'll find the video again and link it down below if you want to check it out. It's only like 4 minutes long. He said that Lee was along the Potomac River, right? And I was reading about it after. I guess there was only one access point behind him, so he had his back to the Potomac. And then the guy says, "Yet he stood his ground," or "Yet he stands his ground," something like that, as if it was a credit to him. But if you're cornered, you have one route of escape, right? One access point, and there's a ratio of 2 to 1. How impressive is it that you decided to fight while you were like a corner dog? No, Lee did eventually escape at that access point, I think. So that would make me wonder why he didn't do that in the first place when he was outnumbered 2 to 1. Maybe it's because he was in a decent defensive position. I don't know. I don't know enough about the battle, but I definitely noticed that, and it's something I'm going to be paying attention to while I read this. I think Antietam is still the bloodiest day in American history. 20-some thousand, I think it was like 22,000 casualties, something along those lines. More Union casualties, I think, than Confederate casualties, which would make sense because the Confederates were in a defensive position. But as a proportion of the total force, I think it was more Confederate casualties. I think it was like 31, something like that, 32% Confederate casualties, and then 20-something for the Union, something like that. And so given the state of the Confederacy, obviously they couldn't afford that in the way that the Union Army could. So again, I won't say more than that because I'm not a Civil War guy yet. I don't have the bona fides that so many of you do, um, and so I'll stop there. But those are some of the things that I'll be thinking about while I read that. Should be a lot of fun. And then this one I'll definitely not say a lot about because it's not out yet. This comes out April 29th. And this is Capitalism and Its Critics by John Cassidy, who wrote How Markets Fail, which I think is kind of an old book now. Pretty sure I read that in college, right? And I don't even know how new it was when I read it. But this is simply, it looks like, and I haven't even dipped my toe into this, so I need to start this week, because I think I'm going to want to go through it fairly slowly, or fairly carefully, I should say. But I think it is just an overview of critics of capitalism, and so obviously Keynes, Marx, some of the obvious figures, but then there's a host of more obscure figures who I'm not totally familiar with. So a couple of these will be new to me. But see, the second chapter in here is Adam Smith on colonial capitalism and slavery. Now, again, I don't know much about the book yet, but that's a cheeky thing to do. If you're actually going to take, and I don't know for sure that's what he's doing, if you're going to take Adam Smith, who's like the guy you think of when it comes to capitalism, and then say, okay, he's a critic of slavery, so you're turning it against the capitalists and saying slavery is part of capitalism. Do you see how he's doing both there? Oh, Adams. Okay, let me rephrase this. You own slavery because you support capitalism, and Adam Smith, I'm going to take him as our side being a critic of capitalism. Like I that really bothers me. We'll see if that's exactly what happens in that chapter. But at a glance, it looks like that might be. We'll see. But I think this is going to be a fun thing to read. Obviously, I'm pro-capitalist, I guess you could say. But just, it could be a useful book. Maybe some interesting figures, I don't know. And I'm curious to see if he tries to have some kind of unifying reason of how he pulls all these people in, or if it's just going to be a scattershot of critics of capitalism and what their biggest and most famous critique is. We'll see. I'll follow up on that once it's out. And then the next two are World War II. Again, we can never vary too far from World War II. As I mentioned, I'm going through all the single volume histories of World War II. And when I said that in my last video, I said, okay, so I know that I have to read one every month, and then there's a few months where I have to read two. That was a damn dirty lie. I have to read two in a month, most months. Not every month, but almost every month, I think. I have them all except for two I have written down that I still need to get. Obviously, I won't need to get them for a while because I have so many other options to get to. But to make sure I don't fall behind here, I picked out the next two, which together I don't even know if they're going to be as long as Total War. Either way, one I've read before and one I haven't. The one I haven't read before, I was pointed to on Scott Alexander's new blog Substack. He did Slate Star Codex, which was a famous niche blog for a long time that had a small cult following, I guess. And his new one is called Astral Codex 10, I guess. That's a Substack. But he did a book review competition, and I don't know if this won it or if it was just one of the finalists, but that's how I was pointed to this. I hadn't heard of it before. Although the review is way overlong. I don't even know if you could call it a review. Either way, whatever it was fascinating and drove me to this. It's How the War Was Won by Phillips Payson O'Brien. And this, I guess, challenges what we would consider the standard narrative of World War II. Yeah, this is over 500 pages. And this is the next one. Anyway, so as I was saying, the standard vision of World War II, so about 600 pages. So we're getting close to Total War, but not quite there. So, stressing the importance, for example, of cutting off Japanese shipping and bombing German industry as being more important than keystone battles like Kursk or something like that. That would be one example. I think this book is full of things like that, based on what that review said. So I will be really excited to get to this. I've been doing it for a while, I've been meaning to for a while, and it came out um, in 2015, so it's not new, and I really should have read it by now. So I'm really excited to do that. And then this one I read, I liked, I liked it. I won't go too much further than that. But then after this came out in, must have been 2018, the author went MAGA, and so this is going to be a weird reading experience. Yeah, 2017. So this is Victor Davis Hanson, The Second World Wars. World Wars plural because he's saying basically exactly what they're saying in World War II or Total War. So this isn't like a new idea. You know, this didn't become what we consider one coherent war until 1941. These were disparate wars prior to that. And really, honestly, once you get to that point, it's still, you know, how much of a relationship do the two have with each other? Obviously, some, but how much sense does it still make to call it one war, right? So that's the idea behind the title there. But yeah, 2017. So Trump was already in our politics, and Hansen, though, hadn't written his book, was it The Case for Trump? But I'm sure it was in his mind or he was working on it. So I wasn't reading it knowing that the first time, and I'm going to this time. And so I'm definitely going to be carefully looking for, you know, statements that point to the fact that maybe that was coming. Maybe I should have seen that he was going to make that turn. I'll be looking for that. But if none of that's there, all the better. It could still just be a good history of World War II, like I thought when I read it. And maybe one of the last good things this author ever wrote. Although I didn't read that last book he came out with, so I can't say anything about that. We'll see. One thing I do remember about this book is I thought it was a nice overview for getting a sense of the phases, especially in the Battle of the Atlantic. Sometimes people don't get how that was demarcated between the happy times, and then with how the convoy system developed and things like that, and how we were responding to each other. And I felt like he gives a really good sense of the phases of the Battle of the Atlantic, both in terms of describing those events, but also even in terms of production numbers and things like that. I thought they were all intertwined really nicely when I read that last time, and a lot of single volume overviews don't do that as neatly as he did. So that's one thing that's on the top of mind too when I just think of this book. So I'm interested in reading it again. So these are the World War II books for April. And there you have it. Those are the 6 books. Obviously, there's a few other things that may sneak their way onto that list, but that's my April TBR. Okay, well, this got much longer than I anticipated, so I apologize. I'll end it here. Try to break these out in the future. And then hopefully this week, it doesn't look too busy. Look at my calendar. The week itself doesn't look too busy. So hopefully, if my obligations aren't too involved this coming weekend, I can sneak in a few extra videos. I really hope so. So, we'll leave it there. Thanks, BookTube.